So when you're using a two-post lift, the last thing you want to have happen is the anchors that secure it to the concrete start pulling out of the floor. Well, this one I installed a little under a year ago, so not that long ago. It's a 12,000-pound two-post lift, and I used the anchors that were included with the lift. I believe they were about 6 to 8 inches long, and they're 3/4 inch. I shimmed the plates on the floor to where there was no gap underneath the plate, and I torqued them all to the torque specs that the lift company recommended. So far, they've been holding up decently, but this anchor here and this anchor here have failed, and they're starting to loosen up. I've been periodically retightening these things, about once every other month or so, and they just keep getting, a little looser and a little looser. These I can still torque, but this one, like when you install these things, the threads are flush with the top of the nut when you pound it in. And so when you tighten it up and that wedge starts pulling into the concrete, you're going to have threads come out. But they say anything more than 1 inch of thread sticking out of the top of the nut, that wedge anchor is considered, they consider that a failing wedge anchor. As you can see, that's more than 1 inch coming out of that one. So it's not stupid tight. These are supposed to be 150 foot-pounds, if I remember right. So shoot, even these are, it's probably been 3 or 4 weeks since I last tightened them. Not really impressive, but at least they do have some tension. This one, however, take my pinky finger here, very easily. It's just pulling right out of that concrete. So the solution that I'm going to do, I got this Ultra Bond HS1cc epoxy that's meant specifically for epoxying threaded rod and rebar and threaded inserts into concrete. You can use this in underwater applications. You can use it in cracked concrete, of course uncracked concrete. Bought a special epoxy gun off Amazon to use this in. I thought this was going to be very expensive. That's what my brother was telling me, and that's why we went with the wedge anchors at first, because he had heard it was going to cost like over $500 just for the epoxy for one lift. Well, he heard wrong, because this stuff only cost, I think, $35. Very, very reasonable. I mean, you're talking 2 11-ounce tubes, so you got plenty to do the job, and I think it has a shelf life of 2, maybe 3 years, and it comes with a pretty long mixing, nozzle. And I also bought these longer nozzles because I'm going to be drilling these holes in the concrete as deep as I can get them. So I want a nozzle that can go all the way to the bottom of the hole when I start putting in the epoxy. And I'm going to go back with a 3/4 inch anchor. Got this from McMaster Car, grade 5. Coated threaded steel rod, 3/4 inch. And I got an assortment of hammer drill bits. This is a Diablo. Now, it's a 3/4 inch anchor, but when you're using epoxy, you need room around the threaded rod for the epoxy, so you're actually going to drill a 7/8 hole when you're using this brand epoxy for a 3/4 inch anchor. And, this drill bit is, I think, 18 inches long or so we can get real deep with it. It's supposed to work with rebar in the concrete. I don't think it's supposed to be able to drill through the rebar, but if you hit the rebar, you're not going to mess the bit up. I mean, that's what I think that's made for. It says concrete with rebar, but if you read the reviews, it seems that they will actually not really drill through rebar for the most part. Also got the Milwaukee, same thing. It's just a different brand. And this, if I do hit rebar, this is supposed to actually go through. It's called a rebar cutter, made by Bosch as well. It's 7/8 inch. And then I got a wire brush. You're supposed to brush out the holes really good when you're using epoxy, and then blow it out with compressed air. You want that hole to be very clean, or else you won't have good adhesion. So here I looked up the strength of the wedge anchors versus the epoxy anchors. So we're on the Simpson Strong Tie wedge all anchors. We code down here to the 3/4 inch anchor. And this is the depth. So if we went to 6 3/4 inch depth, and we go over here and we go over to tension load and 2,000 psi concrete. The allowable is what we want to see. So the allowable tensile strength in 2,000 pound concrete, that's going to be 2,510 pounds at 6 3/4. That's the allowable tension load. So I would be pulling on the anchor just straight, trying to pull it straight out of the concrete. And we go down here, we go over to their shear loads. So that would be trying to shear it off sideways. And we go same 2,000 psi concrete here, allowable for a 3/4 inch anchor in 6 3/4. We get 4,610. So those are the numbers for the wedge. Now we're going to go over here. This is the PDF document for the epoxy that I'm using in this video. And so the tension loads for threaded rod, that's what we're going to be using, and a hole drill with a hammer drill, which is what we're going to be using, for a 3/4 inch. And it says right here we're going to be using a 7/8 drill bit. And they got, you know, if we go to the same 6 3/4 inch depth, which I'm going to go way deeper than that, but just saying, if we did, now this does say over or equal to 2,500 psi, so about the same tensile strength on the concrete there, 8,625. So that's a lot larger than the number that we got for the tensile strength, which go back here, and we had 2,510 allowable, and go back over here, and we got 8,625. But the beautiful thing is with threaded rod, I can go as deep as I want. I'm not limited to that shorter wedge anchor, so I'm going to try to shoot for 15 inch, because why not? And that gives me 24,000 pounds of tension strength. That's a massive amount, and I should never ever have to worry about these anchors failing. And then we go down here to the shear load for 3/4 inch. 6 3/4 depth. We had 12,800 something pounds. The other one was like 4,000 pounds. So almost triple, or about triple the shear load, which is pretty amazing. And 45,000 pounds if I can actually get it down to 15 inch depth. And that's why I bought those 18 inch drill bits, so I could hopefully get down to 15 inches of threaded rod into the slab. Now I'm part of a Facebook group that consists of shop owners from across the country. And when presented with the fact that an epoxy anchor has a larger shear strength and a larger tensile strength than a wedge anchor, they poo-poo the whole idea and say, well, I've been using wedge anchors for the last 35 years and nothing bad ever happened out of it. Well, my neighbor's been drunk driving for the last 30 years and he hasn't crashed yet, so why stop now? I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. One of the guys said, well, the reason I'm having a problem is because I'm just tightening them too often, like I'm just supposed to leave the anchor loose, and that will solve all my problems. I'm sure the average shop owner never actually checks the torque on their wedge anchors. If they did, they would realize just how loose they get and that they need to be retightened pretty often. And the problem with continuing to tighten your wedge anchors is the more you tighten them, the farther that stud will start pulling out of that nut. And the farther that stud comes out of the nut, the shallower the wedge anchor gets in the concrete. And the closer the wedge anchor gets to the surface of the concrete, the weaker the whole anchor is. And the larger chance you have of it cracking the concrete and just pulling a whole chunk of concrete out. If you just Google, 2-post car lift wedge anchor failure, you will see instances where the wedge anchors did pull out of the concrete and would break the concrete. I'm not saying an epoxy anchor couldn't do the same thing, but a wedge anchor has a much higher tendency to do that because all of the force of a wedge anchor is in those expansion wedges, those 3 expansion wedges that are spreading out. And so they're putting all their force outward, trying to expand into the concrete. And as they approach the surface of the concrete, that outward expansion of those fingers can crack the concrete, versus an epoxy anchor is just being pulled straight up and it has a much lower tendency to crack the concrete. If you go to YouTube and actually look at the strength tests of a wedge anchor versus an epoxy anchor, they actually hook a bottle jack up to these things, and the wedge anchor, not only did it fail at a much lower rating, it completely cracked the concrete, versus the epoxy anchor actually just pulled straight out of the concrete with no damage at all. So that was really nice. So let's just take some more looks. This is a 10,000 pound Challenger, and we got the torque wrench set at 150 foot-pounds. And that's the torque spec for a 3/4 inch wedge anchor. Look at how much I've already turned it. I don't want to keep going because, like I said, the farther I go, the weaker that anchor's going to get. And to be honest, it probably won't end up clicking on me for quite a while. I mean, that one's pretty loose. And one guy said, well, it's because you're not a professional. You didn't professionally install it. Like somehow paying some guy money is going to make the wedge anchor work better. That's the only difference between an amateur and a professional, is a professional's getting paid to do it, and I'm doing it for free. All you do is you simply drill a hole. For a 3/4 inch wedge anchor, you drill a 3/4 inch hole. You drop it in, you torque it down. That's it. Like there's no fancy process here. How can you mess that up? The only thing you could do wrong is not drill the hole straight. But, you know, we're not idiots, and we didn't drill the holes crooked. This one, we did pay a professional to install. Challenger 4-post. It's been installed for, 6 months now. Let's check some of these. They're still, all these lifts have 3/4 inch wedge anchors. Okay, that one torqued down. Wow, that one was pretty darn loose. That don't feel good. In my hand, it feels like the wedge is pulling up vertical on this one, because it doesn't really, you can sort of feel when it starts getting tighter as you pull it, but this one, it feels, okay, now it's starting to get tighter. Not a good feeling. I'm gonna stop there before I do any more weakening to that. Oh wow, look at that. Yep, good old wedge anchors. I won't be using these anymore. Wow, damn, that one was loose. So, you get the point. Wedge anchors suck. Now some people say, I don't want to use epoxy. It's just super glue. I don't trust it. I need something mechanical, so I got to use a wedge anchor with epoxy. That'll do it. It'll be best of both worlds, right? I do not recommend that. See, with a 3/4 inch wedge anchor, you drill a 3/4 inch hole. With a 3/4 inch epoxy anchor, you drill a 7/8 hole. That's because you need more room around the anchor for the epoxy to do its job. If you try to use a wedge anchor with epoxy, you don't have hardly any room around the stud because you just drilled a 3/4 inch hole. So the epoxy doesn't really have much there at all to work with. So you're not getting the full strength of an epoxy stud. So why even mess with it? Do it right. Do it right the first time. Do a 7/8 hole. Use threaded rod, and now you're getting the full strength. You're doing it like they want you to, and trust the science. They've already done the test, and they already know that a properly installed epoxy anchor, and see, this is the key word, properly. And a lot of people are like, well, if epoxy anchors were so good, these lift manufacturers would include them with the lift, you know, because they're the ones liable if the thing falls over. Well, think about it. If you install the lift with their wedge anchors and it falls over, in my opinion, the lift company doesn't have anything to worry about because they've already spec'd it all out. Well, Red says right here, this lift takes 14 anchors and they all have a tensile strength of 2,500 pounds each. You do the math, that's plenty of strength. It was definitely installer error, or the wedge anchors themselves failed, and that's not our fault. Go talk to Simpson, you know? I mean, what's easier to include with the lift? A wedge anchor that's pretty much dummy proof, you drill a hole, you tap it in, you torque it down, or should we include threaded rod that has to be cut to the proper length, and epoxy that has to, you know, be not expired, and make sure that the customer actually cleans the hole out well. I mean, you got to have a clean hole. You think the average guy installing these things is going to vacuum it out real good and blow it out with compressed air and take a wire brush and brush it out several times and blow it out and make sure it's perfectly clean? You can't trust everybody to do it 100%. So the wedge anchor is the foolproof way, and it does work. I'm not saying they don't work, but what I'm trying to say is the epoxy anchor, in my opinion, is a superior method. And if I'm going to be under one of these things, risking my life, I'd rather have an epoxy anchor, which is rated to be stronger, and especially after the experiences that I've had as a mechanic in the last 2 shops I've worked at, and this one where we have wedge anchors that are constantly needing to be, tightened. I'm going epoxy from now on. Now, if you already have lifts installed like we do here with wedge anchors, I would only recommend replacing them if they actually are starting to fail. So if you see more than 1 inch of stud off the top of the nut and you're tightening it and it's lost its tension, yeah, go ahead and replace it. And I'm going to show you next in the video how I removed it with my caveman methods. But here's the deal: when you remove a wedge anchor, there's that risk you take of cracking the concrete, which is why I say only replace them if they're loose. If they're still tight, leave them alone. You go try to pull them out, you can break the concrete. And the way that I used to remove the wedge anchor was something that I just came up with. It did work. It did not crack the concrete. I removed 4 of them so far on this one post and have successfully replaced them with epoxy, and I haven't died yet. So they must have worked. But I found a method on YouTube, a couple videos. They were poor quality, so it was hard to see exactly what they were doing. But basically, what they did is they attached a drill. They took the nut off the wedge anchor. They hit the stud down so it then became loose. They then took a nut. I guess you could take a coupling nut and weld it on there, or do something. But get a drill attached somehow to that stud, so you can spin it up as fast as you can and push it down and pull it up. And what you want to do is stick abrasive media down into the hole. So this guy was using water mixed with diamond dust. I imagine you could mix a valve lapping compound, some coarse valve lapping compound with something and pour it down the hole. Just something to give it some abrasiveness, and just spin that anchor as fast as you can and start pushing down and pull it up. Eventually you should wear off the tapered section of the wedge anchor. It's not tapered all that far on the bottom. It can't be tapered past the size of a 3/4 inch bit to drill that hole. So it shouldn't, in my opinion, take all that long to wear off the bottom of the anchor, and then you should be able to pull it right out once that happens. Now, these guys in the video were using a bottle jack that after they sat there and spun it for a while, they used a bottle jack and removed it that way. And they said it only took about 10 to 15 minutes per anchor. But I imagine, like I said, if you sat there long enough, you gave it maybe 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes sitting there spinning it, eventually it should wear off the bottom of that anchor, and then you pull it out with no damage to the concrete. Now, it will leave the expansion wedges in the concrete, which is not a big deal. You'll see later in the video when I show you my method of removal, the same thing happened where I just removed them by brute force, and luckily it didn't crack the concrete, but it did leave the expansion wedges, those little fingers on the bottom of the anchor. It left those inside the concrete. But it was not a big deal because I had to go to a bigger 7/8 hole. So when I was drilling it out, I used my rebar cutter that I showed you earlier in the video, and it was able to cut through the top section of those expansion wedges, and it broke it off into the 3 fingers, because those 3 fingers are only joined at the very top section of the expansion wedge. So once you drill through that, bore through it with that rebar cutter, it breaks it into 3 pieces, and you can pull it out of the hole with a magnet and continue drilling. So without further ado, here's my highly sped up video of how I removed one of these wedge anchors. Now, I will be repeating a lot of the information I've already said as I edited this video for my short speed. These wedge anchors on this car lift lasted less than a year before they started to pull out. In this video, I'm going to use a simple technique to remove stubborn wedge anchors so we can replace them with a much more reliable chemical anchor. After greasing the threads, I place a piece of thick steel over the stud with a piece of plate welded to the bottom to act as a fulcrum. The fulcrum is placed close to the load to give me more leverage and therefore more force on the anchor when I hit it with a sledgehammer. I then go back and forth, hitting it with a hammer and tightening the nut with an air impact to slowly draw the stud out of the concrete. I'll be replacing these anchors with 3/4 inch threaded rod that is held in with Ultra Bond anchoring epoxy. I will be uploading a full video that shows the whole process of installing the new chemical anchors. This isn't the first time I've seen wedge anchors fail, so I highly recommend you don't use them in a dynamic load situation, such as for car lifts. When the anchor is finally removed, you will see that the expansion wedges were left inside the concrete. This isn't a big deal, as it will be drilled through with a rebar cutter when we go to install the new anchors. Now that the anchors are out, I use a die grinder and a steel burr to barely increase the size of the hole in the base of the lift and the shim underneath to allow the larger 7/8 inch hole or 7/8 inch drill bit to pass through. Now I am drilling down with a normal 7/8 inch masonry bit until I contact the top of the expansion wedges that were left in the concrete. Here you can see I just made contact with the expansion wedges. Now I will be using this 7/8 inch rebar cutter to bore through the top of the expansion wedge. When I finally make it through the wedge with the drill bit, it will break the expansion wedge into 3 separate pieces, which is then easily removed with a magnet. Now I swap back over to the masonry bit and continue drilling to an approximate depth of 15 inches. Here, I stick the wire brush on a power drill and continue brushing the hole until it's nice and clean. There you go. This hole is straight, clean, and ready for epoxy. So you can download the full instructions on their website, but it has the instructions on the back as well. They just don't go into as much detail. So, we're going to be using the hammer drilled holes step here, and basically it just wants you to brush it out like I showed me using that brush, and blow it out with air, and then come down here. It says remove the cap, insert the cartridge into the tool, and yada yada yada. But anyways, it says fill the hole 2/3 full with the adhesive starting at the bottom, and withdraw the tube as needed. So I went ahead and cut those 3-foot threaded rod sections in half. Now I got a factory edge on each one. I don't have to deburr and drop that down in the hole. I'll just cut them off later because they're obviously going to be too long. Now, this is the syringe, or whatever you want to call it, the tip that they send with the epoxy, and it is 10 inches long. This is the tip that I bought from Walmart, believe it or not. It's hard to find these things, but Walmart had it in stock, and 15 inches or so. It's made by the same people who make the epoxy. The epoxy gun is going to be, I got this off of Amazon. So far it seems to be decent quality. I'm not really impressed, but now when it comes to these epoxy guns, you want to make sure you get one that's a 1-to-1 ratio, so both tubes are going at the same feed rate, and you want a big enough one. I think this one's rated for 600 milliliters, so yeah, each tube is a 300 milliliter capacity, because they sell a lot of these dual cartridge guns that will not fit these large 600. This is actually 627 milliliter, but it fits in there just fine. So starting at the bottom of the hole, I'm filling the hole with epoxy, and I attempt to measure how much epoxy I have in the hole, but that was a complete waste of time. Well, that was a hectic mess. I would definitely recommend do not drill all the way through the slab. On this anchor, I accidentally went all the way through, and I filled up the hole with epoxy, and it just pushed it out the bottom of the slab, like most of the epoxy, without much resistance. Even though you could see under the slab, it had the hard pack rock under there. You would think it would support the epoxy, but it definitely went under the slab somewhere. So I had to let it sit for about 5 minutes or 10 minutes to thicken just a little bit, and ended up using another complete tube almost in this one hole to fill up whatever void was under the slab. And I finally got enough epoxy in there where when I pushed the rod down, it squirted back up. So I think we're good on that one, but definitely do not drill all the way through the slab, or else you're gonna be using a bunch of epoxy. And as far as the measurements go, I did all the math and everything to fill the whole 2/3. I don't know why I even bothered, because it's just impossible to actually tell how full the hole is. I thought that maybe I could feel the resistance of the epoxy. I thought it would be thicker than what it was. It was a little bit thinner in the consistency than what I thought it'd be. I thought it was going to be thicker, and therefore I might be able to actually feel the epoxy as I'm drawing the tube up the hole, but you can't really feel it. So basically, just fill it full and stick it in, and whatever oozes out, just clean it up. That's the way I'm going to do it from now on. I was very surprised. I was actually able to clean it up with some brake parts cleaner. It didn't come off easy. I mean, the stuff is... I actually got most of it off my hands, but it does wipe up off the floor so long as you don't let it dry. You take some brake parts cleaner and it comes off. So now I'm just going to wait until the morning, and so I can torque these things down, cut them off where they need to be. The cool thing about this stuff is look at the cure time. So full cure time on the right is only 2 hours when you're at 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So down here in Texas, we're going to be somewhere between 2 and 7 hours of full cure time. That is quick. And of course, the working time it gives in between 3 and 16 minutes. And that's what made me nervous, because I was like, man, I really got to rush this because I don't want that stuff to harden in that tube. But I really didn't have to rush as much as I did. It seems to harden a lot slower than I expected it as far as your working time goes. So based off of Ultra Bond specs here for a 3/4 inch threaded rod, it's supposed to be 105 foot-pounds maximum install torque. Well, there you go. Torque down, it's all done. If this is the last video you ever see me post, I guess it didn't work out so well.